Malik and Darnell were brothers who had always depended on each other. They grew up in a neighborhood where life wasn't easy. Every day was a challenge, but they had learned to face it together. Malik, the older of the two, worked as a mechanic. He loved cars and could fix almost anything with an engine. Darnell, younger and more carefree, drove a delivery van for a local company. Even though their jobs were humble, both were proud of their work and of the way they lived their lives honestly. They never complained, and they never took shortcuts that could hurt anyone. One evening, the brothers were heading home after a long day. It had been a hot day and the streets smelled of dust and gasoline. Darnell suggested taking a shortcut through a less crowded road to save some time. Malik hesitated at first. The shortcut wasn't very safe, especially after dark, but Darnell persuaded him, saying they would be fine if they just stayed alert. As they drove down the narrow, winding road, they noticed a car that looked out of place. It was a brand-new luxury car, the kind you rarely saw in their neighborhood. The car was off the road, partially in a ditch, and the headlights were flickering weakly. Malik slowed the van down and motioned to Darnell to stop. "Something's not right," Malik said, his voice tense. Darnell nodded, his eyes fixed on the vehicle. The brothers had seen car accidents before, but this one felt different. There was no one around for miles, and the car looked badly damaged. Malik and Darnell exchanged a look, the kind brothers share when they know a decision needs to be made fast. They got out of the van and walked cautiously toward the car. As they got closer, they realized someone was inside. A man, dressed in an expensive suit, was slumped in the driver's seat. Blood trickled from his forehead and his breathing was uneven. Malik checked to see if he was conscious. The man stirred but did not open his eyes fully. Darnell whispered, "He's hurt bad. We have to help him." Malik hesitated. He knew who the man was. Edward Stanton, a billionaire, a man who had made headlines for saying things that offended people like them. Malik had read articles about him, about how he publicly insulted black people and acted as if he was better than everyone else. For a moment, the brothers thought about just leaving. They didn't owe him anything. Why risk themselves for someone so arrogant and hateful? But looking at him now, slumped and vulnerable, Malik felt a tug in his chest. This was a human being in need, no matter how terrible his words had been. Darnell saw it too. "Come on, Malik," he said quietly. "We can't just leave him here. He needs help." Malik nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. They approached the car carefully. Edward groaned and opened his eyes slightly. The first words out of his mouth were harsh, even in his weakened state. "Get away from me." "Don't touch me." Darnell ignored the insult. "Sir, you're hurt. We need to get you out of here." Malik opened the car door slowly. Edward tried to resist, swinging his arms weakly. "I don't need your help. I can manage." He spat. The brothers stayed calm. They knew he was scared, and fear often made people lash out. "We're not going to hurt you," Malik said firmly. "But you won't last long here. Let us help you." It took a few minutes of careful maneuvering, but finally they managed to lift Edward from the car. He was heavy and Malik felt the strain in his arms, but Darnell helped steady him. Edward's resistance weakened as his injuries became clearer. His arrogance faded in the face of pain and vulnerability. Once they got him to the van, they settled him carefully on the seat. Edward winced and groaned but said nothing else. Malik climbed into the driver's seat and started the engine. The road ahead was long and rough, but they had no other choice. They drove carefully, keeping the van steady, ignoring Edward's occasional mutters and complaints. During the ride, Edward's voice finally softened slightly. Why are you helping me?" he asked, still weak but less angry. Darnell looked at him, keeping his eyes on the road. "Because it's the right thing to do," he said simply. "We don't care what you said or did. Right now you need help and we can give it to you." Edward was silent for a moment, and Malik could see that the man was struggling to understand. He had never experienced kindness like this, especially not from people he had looked down on. He seemed confused, almost fragile, as if the act of being helped by people he had insulted was something he could not process. The van bounced over potholes and uneven patches of road, the brothers' focus unwavering. Outside, the sun had started to set, casting an orange glow across the empty fields. The isolation of the road made everything feel more intense. Edward remained quiet, his pride battered but slowly giving way to fear and uncertainty. Finally, they reached a small hospital on the edge of town. Malik ran inside, carrying Edward's weight as Darnell followed, clutching a bag with some water and first aid supplies they had grabbed from the van. The hospital staff were surprised to see the situation, but they quickly took over, examining Edward and beginning treatment for his injuries. Malik and Darnell stepped back, watching as Edward was tended to. The man who had seemed untouchable just hours ago now looked fragile and human. They exchanged a glance, a silent acknowledgement of what they had done. It was not about gratitude or recognition or even the risk they had taken. It was about doing the right thing when someone needed them, no matter who that person was. After making sure Edward was in good hands, Malik and Darnell left the hospital. Outside, the night was calm, the stars shining brightly in the clear sky. The brothers didn't speak much on the way back home, but both were thinking about what had just happened. They knew they had done something important, something that would stay with them forever. In the following days, news spread about the rescue. People in the neighborhood spoke about it with a mix of surprise and admiration. Two brothers had saved a billionaire, someone who had openly insulted their community, simply because it was the right thing to do. For Malik and Darnell, the attention didn't matter. They were proud of their actions, not for the recognition, but because they had acted with courage and humanity when it was most needed. And somewhere, in a hospital room far from the streets they knew so well, Edward Stanton began to realize that the world was not always as he believed. That maybe, just maybe, there were people who could show him kindness even when he did not deserve it. That night, Malik and Darnell sat on the porch of their small home, tired but satisfied. Life was not always fair, but they had proven to themselves that integrity, bravery, and compassion were stronger than anger, prejudice, or fear. And although they didn't know it yet, this night, this choice would change not just Edward Stanton's life, but theirs as well. After getting Edward Stanton into the hospital, Malik and Darnell waited in the small waiting area, their clothes still dusty and their hands slightly scraped from the rescue. Neither of them spoke much at first. The events of the night were still fresh, and both were trying to process what had just happened. Darnell finally broke the silence, leaning back in the chair. "Man, I didn't think it'd be this serious," he said quietly. Malik nodded. "Yeah, he's hurt worse than I thought. But the doctors seem to know what they're doing. He'll be fine." They glanced at the glass doors that led to the emergency room. Inside, Edward was lying on a stretcher, bandages around his head and arms connected to monitors. His usual air of arrogance was replaced by vulnerability, and for a moment the brothers almost didn't recognize him. They could see that underneath his wealth and attitude he was just a man, frightened and alone. A nurse came out and gave them a brief update. "He's stable. He has some cuts and a mild concussion, but nothing life-threatening. He'll need to stay overnight for observation, though." Malik and Darnell exchanged glances. Darnell frowned. "We should check on him again," he said. "Make sure he's okay." Malik hesitated. "I don't know. He doesn't like us." "He called us names." Darnell shook his head. "That doesn't matter. He still needs help. We saved him. We can't just walk away now." Malik sighed, realizing Darnell was right. Their choice to help Edward wasn't about what he had said or done. It was about doing the right thing. They went back into the room. Edward stirred and opened his eyes slightly. When he saw them, his expression twisted into a mixture of confusion and discomfort. "What? Are you still here?" he muttered weakly. "I told you. I don't need your help." Darnell smiled softly. "You need it now. And we're here. That's all." Edward looked away, embarrassed. He had never been in a situation where someone had helped him without expecting anything in return, especially people he had insulted. He tried to cover it with anger, but it was clear that he felt something unfamiliar. Shame, maybe. Or maybe just surprise. Over the next few hours, the brothers stayed near the room, quietly watching over him. Edward drifted in and out of sleep, sometimes murmuring complaints or muttering insults, but Malik and Darnell ignored them. They were used to people saying hurtful things and had learned not to let it affect them. At one point, Edward suddenly sat up, wincing from the pain. Why are you doing this?" he asked, his voice shaky. "I've said things I shouldn't have, and yet you still help me?" Malik looked at him calmly. "Because it's the right thing to do. Doesn't matter what you said. We help people in need, that's all." Edward looked away again, silent. For the first time, He seemed to think about his actions, his words, and the kind of person he had been. He had built a life full of wealth and influence, but it had never taught him humility or respect. And now, faced with two brothers who had risked themselves to save him, he felt something new, an uncomfortable awareness that maybe he had been wrong about a lot of things. The night passed slowly. Malik and Darnell stayed in the hospital lobby, talking quietly about life, work, and family. They were ordinary men, proud of the lives they had built with honesty and hard work. They didn't care about fame, money, or recognition, but as they talked, they both felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that they had done something important, something that mattered more than any paycheck or promotion. By morning, Edward was awake again, his injuries bandaged and his bruises visible. He looked at Malik and Darnell with a mixture of discomfort and curiosity. I guess I owe you something," he said hesitantly, his voice weak but more genuine than the night before. Darnell shook his head. "No, you don't owe us anything. We didn't do this for payment or thanks. We did it because it was right." Edward seemed to struggle with this. He was used to getting whatever he wanted, having people obey him and being in control. Being helped without expectation of reward was foreign to him. The doctors came in for a final checkup before discharge. They told Edward he was strong for his age and that he could leave if he felt up to it. Malik and Darnell offered to drive him home. Edward hesitated, clearly unsure if he could trust them or himself. After a long pause, he agreed. On the way out, Edward tried awkwardly to hand Malik an envelope. Some money. For helping me." Malik waved it off. "We don't need it, really, just take care of yourself," Darnell added. "And maybe think about how you treat people. That's more important than money." Edward looked out the window, quiet. He was probably thinking about what they had said. He had spent years looking down on people like Malik and Darnell, never imagining that they could act with such integrity and courage. The drive back was tense. Edward didn't speak much, and Malik and Darnell stayed focused on the road. Yet beneath the tension, there was a subtle shift. Edward seemed smaller, quieter, as if the night's events had humbled him in ways he didn't fully understand. When they reached his mansion, Edward tried again to offer something. I can pay you for this." Or maybe. He trailed off, unsure how to continue. Malik shook his head again. "Like we said, we don't do this for payment. Just remember tonight, and maybe be better tomorrow." Edward nodded slowly, a rare and silent acknowledgement. For the first time, he wasn't asserting his power, his wealth, or his influence. He was just listening, and that was enough for the brothers. As Malik and Darnell left the mansion, the sun was rising, painting the streets in shades of orange and gold. The world felt different after the night they had shared. They had faced fear, uncertainty, and even the bitterness of someone else's words, and they had acted with courage and kindness. In the following days, they noticed small changes in Edward's life. Security guards and staff began reporting that he was quieter, more reflective. He didn't broadcast insults or harsh words on social media. Malik and Darnell didn't expect any reward, but they felt a quiet satisfaction knowing that their actions had left an impression, even on someone as proud and arrogant as Edward Stanton. The neighborhood also started talking. People were amazed that two ordinary brothers had rescued a billionaire known for his prejudice. But Malik and Darnell didn't let it get to their heads. They continued their work, their routines, and their simple lives. They had learned something far more valuable than fame or money, that acting with integrity, even in difficult situations, could change lives, sometimes in ways you never expect. Meanwhile, Edward began to reflect deeply. For the first time, he saw beyond wealth and status. He realized that people he had looked down upon were capable of courage, empathy, and selflessness in ways he had never imagined. This awareness stayed with him, quietly growing, reshaping his thoughts and challenging the prejudices he had once held without question. Malik and Darnell didn't know it yet, but the events of that night were only the beginning. Their simple act of bravery had planted the seeds for something much bigger, something that could change not only Edward Stanton's life but also the way he would interact with the world. And although neither brother sought recognition, the ripple effects of their actions were already starting to spread, silently but powerfully, in ways they couldn't yet see. As the days turned into weeks, the brothers continued their routines. Malik fixed cars in his small garage, and Darnell drove deliveries through the city. Yet every time they thought about Edward Stanton, they remembered the vulnerability they had seen in him, the brief moments when pride and anger gave way to fear and dependence. And in those memories they found a quiet sense of pride, not in themselves, but in knowing that humanity, compassion, and courage could shine even in the darkest situations. By the end of the week, Edward was fully discharged from the hospital. He returned to his mansion a little weaker, a little more thoughtful, and a little less certain about the superiority he had once believed was absolute. Malik and Darnell, meanwhile, carried on with their lives unshaken and grounded, not realizing yet how much the night of the rescue would shape what was to come. The story of that night remained a secret to many, but in the lives of those three men, it had already begun to weave a complex tapestry of change, one that would test beliefs, challenge pride, and, eventually, bring about transformations no one could have predicted. After Edward Stanton returned home, life began to feel different for him. The mansion, the luxury cars, and the endless staff were the same, but something inside him had shifted. He couldn't stop thinking about Malik and Darnell. Two ordinary men he had looked down upon for years, had risked their own safety to save him. And they hadn't done it for money, fame, or recognition. They had done it because it was right. At first, Edward tried to ignore these thoughts. He was a man used to control, used to being admired or feared. The idea that someone had helped him without expecting anything was uncomfortable, almost impossible for him to understand. He found himself replaying the events of that night over and over. He remembered Darnell's calm voice, Malik's steady hands, the way they had ignored his insults and still carried him to safety. He couldn't believe people like that existed. Edward's friends and business associates noticed a change in him. He was quieter, less brash in meetings, and far more reflective in his conversations. Some of them commented on it, saying he seemed tired or distracted. Edward didn't explain why. He didn't want anyone to know that his thoughts were consumed by two men he had once publicly insulted. Meanwhile, news of the rescue had quietly spread. A few local journalists got wind of the story. Two black brothers rescue injured billionaire in remote area. Some people criticized Edward for his past words, while others focused on the bravery of Malik and Darnell. The brothers themselves didn't pay attention to the news. They were focused on their everyday lives. Malik in his garage fixing cars, Darnell on his delivery routes, but they heard occasional whispers from neighbors who expressed admiration for what they had done. One afternoon, Edward decided he needed to reach out. He didn't know how to do it at first. He was proud, and pride had kept him from admitting mistakes for much of his life, but he felt a growing need to acknowledge what Malik and Darnell had done for him. He asked his assistant to find them. The brothers were hesitant at first when they received the call. Why would this man who had insulted them publicly want to see them again? Still, curiosity and a sense of responsibility led them to agree. When Malik and Darnell arrived at Edward's mansion, they were cautious. The house was enormous, filled with art, luxury, and staff who treated every guest like royalty. Edward met them at the door, looking uneasy and slightly awkward, a stark contrast to the confident, brash man they had once seen in the media. I wanted to say thank you, he said, his voice low, almost embarrassed, for that night. He paused, struggling to find the words. Darnell smiled gently. You don't need to thank us, sir. We did what anyone would do in that situation. Edward shook his head. No, not anyone. Not like you. You didn't know me. You didn't have to risk yourselves. And yet you did, Malik nodded. That's true. But we believe in helping people when they need it. Doesn't matter who they are. Edward looked at both of them, studying their faces. There was no hidden motive, no greed, no pretense. It was raw honesty and courage, and it made him uncomfortable. He had spent years judging people like them without knowing anything about their lives. And now he was realizing how wrong he had been. Over the next few weeks, Edward began to take small steps toward change. He started reflecting on his own words and actions, realizing how his prejudice had hurt people. He reached out to community leaders, asking questions about how he could make amends. He didn't know exactly what to do yet, but he wanted to start somewhere. Malik and Darnell noticed subtle changes in his behavior. When they saw him again, he was less defensive, less dismissive. He asked genuine questions about their lives, their work, and the neighborhood they came from. He listened more than he spoke, and when he did speak, his words were careful and thoughtful. It was a man learning humility in real time, and the brothers saw it clearly. Edward also began donating to local community programs, funding initiatives that supported education, jobs, and mentorship for young people in underprivileged areas. The public noticed these efforts, and reactions were mixed. Some praised his efforts while others doubted his sincerity, but Malik and Darnell could see that something real was happening. It wasn't perfect and it wasn't fast, but it was genuine. One day, Edward invited the brothers to a small private lunch at his mansion. He wanted to explain his perspective and perhaps show them that their actions had made a difference. Over sandwiches and coffee, he spoke openly. "I realize now how wrong I've been," he said. "I judged people I barely knew. I made assumptions based on the color of their skin, their background, and I was cruel. Seeing you two that night, risking yourselves for me, it made me see that I had been living in a bubble of ignorance. I want to change, but I don't know where to start." Darnell leaned back, listening quietly. "Change doesn't happen overnight, sir. It's about doing the right thing every day. You've started already by helping the community. That's a good first step," Malik added. "And remember, it's not about recognition. It's about sincerity. People can see when you're real. That's what matters." Edward nodded slowly, taking in their words. He felt a mixture of gratitude, humility, and guilt. He had been so focused on himself, on his wealth and image, that he hadn't noticed the strength and humanity of ordinary people like Malik and Darnell. Now he couldn't unsee it. Over the next few days, Edward continued to make small changes. He publicly acknowledged his past mistakes in a short statement, carefully crafted but sincere. He didn't seek forgiveness, but he admitted his prejudice and promised to do better. Malik and Darnell were surprised to see the media cover this story, mentioning them briefly as the heroes who had inspired his change. They didn't seek attention, but they couldn't help feeling proud that their actions had made a real difference. As Edward's attitude shifted, his interactions with others began to change too. He was more patient with his staff, more respectful in meetings, and more willing to listen than ever before. People noticed, and some even remarked that the billionaire seemed human in a way they had never expected. Meanwhile, Malik and Darnell continued their lives as before. Malik fixed cars in his small garage, and Darnell drove his delivery van across the city. But now, whenever they thought about Edward, they felt a quiet sense of pride. Not because he had changed, but because they had acted with integrity, courage, and compassion when it mattered most. Their small act of bravery had created a ripple effect that was already reaching farther than they could see. One evening, Malik and Darnell met at their favorite spot by the river, watching the sunset. They talked about the events of the past weeks. "Can you believe it?" Darnell said, shaking his head. "A billionaire. Actually listening to us. Learning from us," Malik smiled. "Yeah, it's crazy. But it just shows. Doing the right thing matters, even if the person you help seems undeserving, even if they've treated you badly before. Sometimes that's the moment that changes everything." Darnell nodded thoughtfully. "I wonder what comes next. He's starting to change, but will it last?" Malik shrugged. "We can't control that. All we can do is keep being who we are. What happens after? That's up to him." And so life continued. Edward Stanton was no longer the same man who had arrogantly looked down on everyone around him. Malik and Darnell remained humble, grounded, and ordinary, but their extraordinary courage had planted the seeds of change. Little did they know the events of this time would soon lead to an even more unexpected turn, one that would surprise them, Edward, and everyone who had been following the story. Through it all, one thing was clear: a simple act of bravery, an act of kindness, and the courage to do the right thing had the power to change lives in ways no one could have imagined. And while the brothers never sought recognition or reward, their choices had already begun to shape a story that would be remembered, not for wealth or status, but for humanity, courage, and the unexpected power of compassion. After the events of the rescue and Edward Stanton's gradual realization of his past mistakes, life began to take on a new rhythm, but not just for Edward. Malik and Darnell noticed subtle changes in their own lives as well. People in the neighborhood spoke differently to them now. It wasn't just curiosity, it was respect. They had saved a man who had once been untouchable in their eyes, a man with money, power, and influence, and they had done it without hesitation, without fear, and without expecting anything in return. Edward, on the other hand, was living through a transformation that he never thought was possible. Every day he forced himself to think about his actions, about his words, and about how he had treated people who were nothing like him. He started small. He reached out to local schools and youth programs, funding scholarships for children in underprivileged neighborhoods. He invested in job programs for young adults who struggled to find work. These weren't grand gestures designed to get attention. They were deliberate, quiet efforts to make a difference, to give back in ways that mattered. At first, some people doubted him. "He's just trying to fix his image," they said. "He's a billionaire who made his fortune by stepping on others. Why would he suddenly care?" Edward didn't respond to the criticism. He didn't need to. The proof of his change was not in his words, but in his actions. And every time he acted with integrity, he thought of Malik and Darnell. Their courage, their humility, and their unwavering sense of what was right reminded him of the kind of person he wanted to become. The brothers themselves remained grounded. Malik was busy in his garage, repairing cars with the same dedication he had always had. Darnell continued his delivery routes, joking with regular customers and sharing a laugh when he could. They didn't see themselves as heroes, even though the world around them began to treat them differently. They were ordinary men, but their extraordinary choices had created ripples that reached farther than they could imagine. One afternoon, Edward invited them over to his mansion again. This time it wasn't about thanks or acknowledgement. He had a project he wanted to discuss, a program that would provide mentorship and job training for young people who had few opportunities. Malik and Darnell were surprised. They had never expected to be involved in anything like this, especially not with someone who had once insulted them publicly. "I don't know if this will work," Edward admitted as they sat in his study, papers and plans spread out before them. "But I want to try. I want to make a difference. And I want your input. I want you to tell me if I'm doing it right." Malik looked at Darnell, then back at Edward. "We'll help," he said simply. "We don't know everything, but we know what works for people in our community. If you're serious about this, we can guide you." Edward nodded, a mixture of relief and gratitude on his face. Over the next few weeks, the brothers began working with him closely. They visited schools, met with local youth groups, and helped design programs that actually addressed the real needs of the community. Edward listened, really listened, and slowly learned that real change required humility, patience, and understanding. During this time, Edward's personality continued to shift. He was less arrogant, less dismissive, and far more willing to admit when he was wrong. He spoke to staff differently, treating them with respect rather than authority. Meetings that once felt like competitions became opportunities for collaboration. People around him began to notice. His friends were surprised at the transformation, some even skeptical, but it was clear to anyone paying attention that something profound had changed. Malik and Darnell watched all of this with quiet satisfaction. They never expected to influence a billionaire, but they could see that their courage and kindness had left a lasting impression. They also noticed that Edward's changes were not just about public image. He had begun to reflect deeply on his personal relationships, apologizing to family and acquaintances he had hurt with his words or actions. It was messy at times, awkward at others, but it was real. One evening, the brothers and Edward sat together in the mansion's garden, overlooking the city lights. Edward spoke quietly, almost to himself. "I've spent my whole life thinking money and power made me strong. But I see now. Strength isn't about that. Strength is about courage, compassion, and integrity. You showed me that," Darnell smiled. "We just did what anyone would do. But I'm glad it helped you see things differently." Malik nodded. "It's not about us. It's about making sure you do something good with your influence now. That's the important part." Edward looked at them, his eyes thoughtful. "I want to do more. I want to reach more people, make a real difference. And I can't do it alone. I need guidance, honesty, and the courage you both have shown me. Will you continue to help me?" The brothers exchanged a glance. They had never imagined being part of something this big, something that could truly change lives, but they knew this was important. "We'll help," Malik said, "but only if you're serious about it." "No pretending, no shortcuts," Edward nodded. "I am serious. I want to change, and I want to make a real impact." Over the following months, their collaboration grew. They visited neighborhoods, schools, and community centers together. Edward funded programs for education, vocational training, and mentorship. He offered internships and apprenticeships for young people who otherwise had little hope. Malik and Darnell were hands-on, teaching skills, sharing experiences, and making sure the programs were practical and meaningful. Through all of this, Edward continued to evolve. He apologized publicly for past statements, acknowledging the harm he had caused. He spoke at community events, sharing his journey and encouraging others to act with integrity. His words were different now, humble, reflective, and sincere. The public began to see him in a new light. Skepticism remained, of course, but the transformation was undeniable. Meanwhile, the brothers never sought recognition. Their lives continued as before, grounded in hard work and honesty. But they could see the impact they were having. Every young person who found opportunity through Edward's programs, every family that benefited from his support, was a testament to the power of courage, compassion, and integrity. One day, Edward invited Malik and Darnell to a meeting with city leaders. They were discussing expanding their programs to reach even more communities. Edward spoke confidently but with humility. He credited the brothers for inspiring his change, for showing him what true courage and humanity looked like. Malik and Darnell felt a quiet pride not in themselves, but in knowing that their actions had helped create something bigger than they had ever imagined. As the sun set over the city that evening, Edward, Malik, and Darnell stood together, looking out at the skyline. Edward spoke softly. "I've learned more from you two than I ever learned from money, power, or education. You've taught me humility, courage, and the importance of doing what's right. I hope I can live up to that lesson every day." Darnell smiled. "You're on the right path. Just keep listening, keep learning, and keep acting with integrity. That's what matters most," Malik added. "And remember, it's not about fame or recognition. It's about helping people and making a real difference. That's the legacy you leave behind." Edward nodded, a genuine smile on his face. For the first time in his life, he felt that he was capable of being more than the person he had been. He felt that he could truly change, not just for himself, but for everyone around him. And he knew he owed part of that change to two ordinary brothers whose courage and kindness had shown him a better way to live. In the months that followed, the programs continued to grow. Young people found opportunities they had never dreamed of. Families experienced relief and hope. The city began to notice the positive changes, and Edward's story became one of inspiration. But through it all, Malik and Darnell remained humble, grounded and focused on their own lives, knowing that real change often begins with ordinary people doing extraordinary things. And while the journey was far from over, one thing was clear: courage, kindness, and integrity had the power to transform not only individuals, but entire communities. Malik and Darnell had acted with their hearts, and in doing so, they had sparked a change that Edward Stanton and the world around him would never forget. Months had passed since Malik and Darnell first rescued Edward Stanton. Life had settled into a rhythm that was both familiar and new. The brothers continued their work, Malik in his garage, fixing cars with steady hands and patience, and Darnell driving his delivery van, joking with customers and delivering more than just packages, but occasional smiles and encouragement. Their lives remained simple, ordinary, and grounded, yet everything around them had changed. Edward Stanton had become a different man. No longer the arrogant billionaire who looked down on people, he was now someone striving to make a difference. His public apologies, community programs, and initiatives to help underprivileged youth were starting to gain recognition. But Edward knew that the real change had started with the two brothers, Malik and Darnell, who had shown him what courage, kindness, and integrity truly meant one afternoon. Edward sent an invitation to Malik and Darnell. It was formal yet personal, and both brothers were curious and cautious. When they arrived at his mansion, Edward greeted them warmly, a genuine smile lighting up his face. He looked different, humble, reflective, and almost eager to share something important. "I have something to show you," Edward said, leading them into his study. The room was filled with blueprints, charts, and plans, but what caught their attention was the excitement in Edward's eyes. "I've been thinking a lot about everything that has happened," he began. "About the night you saved me, about the lessons you've taught me, and about the lives we could change together. And I've decided to start a project, a real meaningful program to support young people in communities like yours. But I don't want to do it alone. I want both of you to be part of it." Malik and Darnell exchanged a look, surprised. "Us?" Malik asked. "We're just regular guys. We don't have experience running programs or managing businesses like this. Edward shook his head. Exactly. That's why I need you. You know the struggles, the challenges, and the realities these kids face. You understand people in a way I never did. And I want your guidance, your honesty, and your hands-on help. Darnell leaned back, absorbing the weight of Edward's words. This is bigger than we imagined. But we'll do it, if it really means helping people, not just for show. Edward nodded earnestly. It's real. I promise you. This isn't about image or publicity. This is about giving young people hope, opportunities, and a chance to succeed. And I want it to be done right with your help. Over the next several weeks, Malik and Darnell became deeply involved in the project. They helped design mentorship programs, vocational training workshops, and educational scholarships. Malik worked on teaching practical skills, like car repair, electrical work, and basic entrepreneurship, while Darnell coordinated logistics, meeting with local schools, and helping the kids see the potential in themselves. Edward provided funding, support, and resources, but he relied heavily on the brothers' knowledge and connection to the community. The transformation was remarkable. Young people who had once felt hopeless were now attending workshops, learning skills, and seeing opportunities they never imagined. Families began to experience hope and stability. The program grew steadily, and its impact became visible throughout the community. But more than that, Edward himself was changing day by day. He was more patient, humble, and empathetic. The lessons Malik and Darnell had taught him, through bravery, integrity, and kindness, were now part of his character. One evening, after a long day of workshops, Malik, Darnell, and Edward sat together in the mansion's garden, overlooking the city. The sun was setting, casting warm orange light over the skyline, and there was a quiet sense of accomplishment in the air. I never thought my life would lead to this, Edward admitted softly. I spent so many years thinking power and money made me strong, but now I see that real strength comes from courage, compassion, and integrity. You two showed me that, Darnell smiled. We just did what anyone would do, but it's good to see you learning from it, taking action, and helping others. Malik added, and remember, it's not about fame or recognition. It's about making a real difference in people's lives. That's the legacy that matters. Edward nodded. I understand that now, and I want to do more. I want to expand this program to reach even more communities, more children, and more families. But I can't do it without you. Malik and Darnell exchanged a glance, realizing how far things had come since that night in the ditch. Their act of courage had grown into something extraordinary, a project that could truly change lives. We'll help, Malik said firmly, but only if we do it the right way. No shortcuts. No pretending. Edward smiled, a sense of pride and humility shining in his eyes. I promise. This will be done with honesty, integrity, and care, and your guidance will be central to everything we do. As months passed, the program flourished. Workshops, training sessions, and mentorship opportunities multiplied. Young people who had once felt invisible were now confident, skilled, and hopeful. Families who had struggled began to see stability, and community leaders began taking notice. Edward's story of transformation, from a man known for arrogance and prejudice to someone making a meaningful difference, was inspiring people everywhere. But the most incredible part was yet to come. Edward, now deeply changed and grateful, decided to offer Malik and Darnell something they had never expected. One afternoon, he called them to his mansion and spoke with a seriousness that immediately captured their attention. I've been thinking, he began, about everything you two have done, not just saving my life, but guiding me, teaching me, and helping make this program a success. I want to offer you an opportunity, a partnership. I want you both to run a foundation together, with my support to help communities like yours across the country. The brothers were stunned. A foundation? Darnell asked, disbelief in his voice. We never thought. We're just regular guys. We don't have experience running something like that.